Slot Car 2021 back with another video, and welcome everyone to the channel. So young racers, old racers and everyone in between. So today what I wanted to do is talk about mag versus non-mag. So the hotly debated topic, which one is better, and yeah, what I've decided to do is turn this into a kind of a 5-part series, which will be quite interesting. I'm going to do try and do one every week. It might not work out exactly one every week, but we're going to go a bit of a, for part one, deep dive into the history. So that's kind of like slot car history and magnet history, which is a bit blurry and not really specific on kind of when the first magnets were being used, and like everything, even the history of slot cars, it's hotly debated on when these ideas and concepts and when it was officially introduced and all the rest. So yeah, we'll get into part one shortly. Just before we do that, I just want to say the slot car nationals over in the US at Electric Dreams. I've been watching the live streams and the racing, and some really good fast lap times around that technical track. It's very technical, and what you find out when things are very technical, they're very hard to be consistent and race at speed when you've got lots of tight twisty corners. It's okay pinning the throttle on the straights and braking for the corners, but that track looks very technical. So some really impressive lap times and very consistent lap times as well from everyone. So it's pretty impressive. I know people have been really kind of preparing cars, working hard, drilling tyres, trying to get the cars set up. So it's well worth going on the Electric Dreams website and downloading a copy of the rules, because it's quite a nice PDF to keep. If people wanted to print it and actually have it as a piece of history in their collection or whatever, that's yeah, it's pretty good. Well produced. It's got all the rules. I think it's the rule book. I did find the rules really easy to follow. So anyone that was going to race, I think, everything was explained very clearly of what you could do to the car and the regulations. So yeah, really well done on that. Because sometimes I read rules for different clubs and you have to ask questions because it's not straightforward, in my opinion, sometimes. So, but yeah, very clear, well produced as well. So yeah, I've been watching that. Also, I've been watching the NSR. I think it was the classics that Pete was competing in, and that happened at the weekend. Really good results. So well done, Pete. I think he's got first in a few different races. He put together his car as well, that he painted up and prepared, and did a little member setup, which was really interesting. And yeah, I think some really hard work's gone into that, and he's got the results. So yeah, well done, Pete. Okay, let's finally get into this first part then, so part one. So all I'm going to do for part one is talk about the history. So we're going to have a little bit of history of slot cars, and then we're going to kind of add in the magnet elements and kind of talk about that as well. So the history of slot cars is it's really not that clear. So going way back, 1912 to be exact, apparently, from my research anyway. So the earliest known commercial slot cars were 1912, and they appeared on the cover of the 1913 to 1914 Lionel catalogues. I think they did trains as well. So this was kind of like electrified cars. I don't believe it was on the traditional, well, what we currently have in terms of the two rails. I think it was a rail in the centre, and the cars got power from the centre of the track, just one point. That's kind of from research what I've found out. And then from there it kind of was kind of popular for a year or so, and then it died off. Then we have the birth of kind of tether cars, so which is something that is really fun to watch, actually. I think there's an still existing and functioning tether car circuit in the UK somewhere. I had a look on YouTube and actually saw kind of how they race the cars, which is pretty interesting. And I know in the US, and there's still some clubs going, and they've got some big club tracks, and these things fly around. So that's more, the tether cars are more of a focus on engineering and speed. So they've got small internal combustion engines, and they run them round a fixed point. So the cars are tethered down, and they let them rip, and they're going round really fast in a circle. So that's interesting, because it kind of, there was lots of different concepts being put around kind of way back then. So we're talking like 20s, 30s, and it's just really interesting to kind of see. And of course, from tether cars, we now have RC cars. So it's really interesting that a lot of the different hobbies centered around kind of the development and progress made over the years, and separated off into their own kind of thing. So obviously from tether cars, we then come back to slot cars around the 50s. So in the UK, Southport, there was an experimental slot car track, and that was really the birthplace of the 132. So way back in the 50s, that was kind of an experimental track, and that was brought about by hobbyists. It wasn't mass market at this point, and that was 132 scale. And from there, people in the US took that and developed that, and people in the UK also took and developed that as well. So at this point, it's still unclear kind of who really put slot cars into the mainstream, because interestingly, in 1957, that's when mini models kind of picked up slot cars, and it was then the Scale X models, which were kind of clockwork or static models, and they were thinking about putting motors into the cars and then hooking them up to a slot system, which had already been developed, but this was kind of like refining it and bringing it to a mass market, and marketing it in a way that it will be available to everyone, not just kind of hobbyists. So obviously you've got Fred Francis, who in the UK kind of went with that, and it was really the birth of Scalextric in the UK. But interestingly, slot car craze wasn't in the UK, it was in the US, and that was a big US phenomenon. And that was kind of the real kind of surge in popularity, with clubs opening up all across the UK. And around the same time, you've got Aurora in the USA, Aurora Plastics, and that was the birth of HO. So, and that really still has, that explains why there's such a strong kind of HO following in the US still, and lots of clubs and things like that. So that explains that. So yeah, a bit of history there. So obviously from there, cars were developed, and quite rapidly. I'm not going to go into all the different scales and history and everything else, but essentially from there, going forward, slot cars were then worked on, and it progressed. So there was lots of progression throughout, and you had a lot of people racing seriously as well. So you had a lot of development of technical development of cars. So this is where a lot of the engineering came in. So you'll see old cars today, and they've got high degrees of high levels of engineering, and that is something that kind of spanned from that era of racing and people modifying the cars and trying to get aerodynamic chassis, and played around with different concepts. But again, I'm not really going to go too much into that, because we will be here for hours. I just want to focus on kind of the magnets. So we're getting to that now. So it was way back in, trying to remember the year now. So like going back to Lionel and magnet traction, and it was actually developed back in the 1940s as a concept in Lionel trains. So this was the obviously you get wheel slip on gradients with trains. So what they developed was a magnetized wheel to help with climbing for trains, which, you know, I think in actual trains they actually have, is it sand that they chuck onto the track to help with wheel slip and things like that? I don't know, I'm not that much into trains, but I have kind of watched a few videos, and that gets put down onto the track and it helps with traction. But obviously not in the, that was more steam trains, I think. But Yeah, so Lionel came up with this idea of magnetizing the wheels, and that would help the model trains grip better on the tracks and perform better. So the idea is quite old, and I think the reason why there's no kind of specific date on actual slot cars, or not that I really know of from research, is that people would keep it quiet. So you're not going to, if you found out that you could get a magnetic effect, you probably weren't going to let on to everyone that that was of benefit. If you were racing cars, then that's probably an advantage that you want to keep quiet. So it's really kind of unclear when magnets were first used in a racing application. Certainly the mass market is easier to determine. So I haven't really looked into HO much, but I have looked into 132. So that's Scalextric brought out the magnetraction officially, I think, in 1988. Obviously, there was magnets being used before then in HO and things like that, but 1988 was when Scalextric added magnets to the bottom of cars, and these were the less magnetic, just like a standard magnet. They weren't the rare earth magnets that you get today that are super strong. So yeah, back in 1988, this really enabled cars to go quicker, and then it allowed kind of downforce to be added, which is debatable whether that was a good direction to go in or not. And since then, obviously, a lot of the modern era cars all have magnets now. Even hobby grade like NSR, Revo slots come with magnets. Granted, they're optional to put in. And people enjoy magnets, and they prefer to use them, which I can understand. But that's kind of where we're at today. Is a lot of the manufacturers rely on magnets, especially the toy brands, to function, to get around the track. If you take the magnets out, they don't really run. So, and I'm not going to go into that in part one, but we'll get to that. So the next few parts are going to be broken down into HO, 132, 124, and magnet versus non-magnet. Some of the benefits, some of the myths, some of the truths, and issues associated with magnet or non-magnet running. So yeah, that's to come. We're going to finish off this part one now. So let me know if you have any kind of dates, and you know of kind of any particular eras where magnets were being used for racing before kind of in the hobby before. I'm guessing that in the 50s and 60s there will be some people that did have magnets or used magnets potentially in some degree. And I think everyone knows that you get magnetic effect from motors as well, but it's not the same as putting a bar magnet in the car and it being glued to the track. So some of the slottits now have the open face motors that provide different levels of downforce. But the magnetic effect is there, but it's not strong too strong that it affects the performance in terms of being able to. The cars still wiggle around and slide around, so in that respect, yeah, it's a lot better in terms of that. But yeah, it's not true that there isn't any magnetic effect. You can get different motors that produce different magnetic effects, but you'll still get some magnetic effect from a few motors, and dependent on how they're located, whether it's an angle winder, sidewinder, and so on. So there will be some magnetic effect from different ones, and depending on how low the motor is placed down towards the track as well. So there we go. So going to wrap up part 1 there, and part 2 will be coming shortly. So take care, have a great week, and see everyone soon.